Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I have another eyeshadow palette related video for you guys. I thought it would be fun to go through my Colourpop 9-pan palettes and do some mini reviews for you, let you know which ones I think are really worth checking out. There are some similarities between a couple of them, and there are definitely some that I recommend over others. One of the questions that I get the most often in my comment section is just, what Colourpop palette do you recommend trying either first or next? I love so many Colourpop palettes, but I think that their 9-pan palettes have definitely become a favorite of mine. They are definitely affordable, they're small and compact, and I feel like 9 shadows is the perfect amount for a palette because you get enough to create a variety of looks, but you don't have an overwhelming amount of shadow to choose from. So I love pulling out my 9-pan palettes. They have quickly become my absolute favorite, so I can't wait to share them with you in today's video. The majority of their 9-pan palettes are $12 each. A few of them are $14, the ones that come in the cardboard packaging, and then the Anna and Elsa palettes are $15. So I'll link everything in the description box along with prices. Okay, let's kick it off with the Ooh La La palette. So this is a good option for you if you like bright pink eyeshadow. There are definitely times where I do want to wear that, but more often than not, I usually go for either like a softer pink or a medium toned pink, and Colourpop has done a couple of other pink themed palettes since this one. So this one is going to be ideal for those of you who like really intense pink looks. There are a couple of toned down shades in here, some medium pinks, some neutrals, and then 2 deeper shades, which definitely come in handy if you want to do something a little bit more dramatic. I don't reach for this palette as much as I used to, just because I do prefer something a little bit more subtle these days when it comes to pink shadow. But if you like something really bright and fun, I definitely think you'll enjoy this one. The next palette is their red themed palette. This one is Main Squeeze. This is a really gorgeous palette, and what I love about this is that it makes a really intimidating color like red a little bit more approachable. So you get some true red shadows in here, some really bright warm tones, but you also get some pink toned reds, some orange toned reds. So I feel like it takes red and puts a spin on it so it's not as intense on the eyes. On top of that, Colourpop shadows do blend really well, and sometimes reds can be a little bit streaky and patchy and hard to work with. This palette's really, really easy to work with. So if red is usually intimidating for you and you want to step outside your comfort zone, this is a great palette to try. And if you like this color story as a whole, I don't think you'll be disappointed in the quality of this one. Next, I have the Orange You Glad palette. I'll be honest and say that I don't reach for this one a whole lot. Typically, if I'm wearing some sort of orange, it's usually a peach or a little bit of a toned down orange, something slightly more coral. So I don't wear a lot of super bright orange shadow all the time, but I did use this one recently just for fun to create a really intense bright orange look, and this palette did not disappoint. This is an intense eyeshadow palette, so those brighter oranges are very, very vibrant. Some of the lighter shades are nice as well to use all over the lid or as transition colors. This palette does have one pressed glitter. I know not everyone is the biggest fan of pressed glitters, so I'll be sure to point that out if any of the other palettes have pressed glitters as well. But the matte shadows are great. They're very blendable, very smooth, and this palette really does show up so intensely pigmented on the eyes. Some colorful shadows kind of blend away to nothing, or you have to work to really build them up, but you get really intense pigmentation right off the bat with this palette. So I do recommend this one if you like brighter tones. The next one is the Honey palette, and this palette I thought was so interesting because when they released it, there weren't a lot of brands doing really bright, vibrant yellow palettes. I know that yellow kind of had its moment last summer, but I still think it's a really fun color to wear because it does add a bright pop of colors to the eyes. But what I like about this palette in particular is that they kind of brought in some yellow tinted neutrals. A lot of Colourpop's monochromatic palettes are very, very colorful, and this one is too, but I think the shade Buzzkill in particular really helps you to create a little bit more of a toned down yellow look. But I think it makes yellow fun, and if you're looking to add yellow to your collection, this is a great deal because for $12 you can create so many different looks. Again, this does come with one pressed glitter right in the center, but the rest of the shadows are true mattes or metallics. The next palette is the Just My Luck palette. This one is their brighter green palette. They also have a mint green palette, which I'll get to in a second, but this one has some mid-toned greens, a couple of deeper greens as well. I would say that this is probably one of my least favorite colorful palettes from Colourpop. The shadows can be a little bit patchy. There are quite a few matte shadows in here, and some of the deeper greens can be a little bit difficult to work with. This probably isn't my favorite shade of green to wear, and there are a couple of variations within this palette, but typically when I reach for greens, I want like a deep forest green or a deep emerald emerald green or something a little bit lighter. So when it comes down to my personal preferences, this isn't my favorite palette that they've done, and I don't think it's the best quality palette that they've done either. If you don't have any greens in your collection and you want to add a couple, I mean, this one is $12, and the shadows, even though they're a little bit patchy, they're definitely not hard to work with compared to some other matte greens that I've tried. I just think when it comes to quality, a lot of the other palettes are just a little bit better than this one. I was so excited when Colourpop released their Blue Moon palette. I just wanted them to do a blue palette for so long, and when they finally released this one, I was so excited. I purchased it right away, and I love it. This palette just makes me happy. You know how there are some makeup products in your collection that just make you happy when you use them, and you can't wait, and you get so excited, and you love how your makeup turns out? That's how I feel about this one and the next one I'm going to talk about. The shadows in here are gorgeous, and there's such a nice variety. You can truly create so many looks with these shadows, whether it's a little bit lighter and softer, almost like a pastel blue look, or something really bright and really dramatic, or even something really dark and smoky. I really think they nailed the color story with this one. The shadows perform so well. Again, sometimes blues can be a little bit patchy, but I don't experience any issues with these. They blend out perfectly, and they're all so gorgeous on the eyes. So if you like blue eyeshadow, if you aren't having like horrible flashbacks to those junior high days where we'd blend blue eyeshadow all the way up to our brows, this might be a fun purchase for you. It's kind of fun because I feel like it almost like redeems blue eyeshadow for me, because I know I can create some really fun looks using this, and you know, it's not all terrible. It's not all like those junior high days. So this is a gorgeous palette. Definitely recommend it. This other palette also makes me so happy when I use it. Whenever I have a special occasion, or I just want my makeup to look extra pretty, or I just want to have fun, I always reach for the It's My Pleasure palette. I had the coolest opportunity in February to collaborate with Colourpop to create like a curated collection of my favorites, and I chose this palette because it's so good. And you can do so much with this palette. You can go all pink, all purple. You can do something a little bit light and soft and even pastel if you use a light hand, or you can do something really intense and dramatic. And I just think the colors are perfect. Every shadow in here performs well. There are 4 matte shadows, and there are 2 like mid-toned pinks, 1 burgundy, and then 1 lighter mauve, which I love using as a transition color. As for the metallics, there are some really interesting duochromes in here, and I love a good duochrome. And then the metallics just look like liquid metal on the eyes. They're so stunning. I have never had any issues with this palette, and I just love it. I would probably wear it every day if I could, but I feel like maybe that would take the fun out of it, because I kind of have like reserved this for like my special occasion palette, and I reach for it on like, you know, an everyday basis as well. But whenever I have like, you know, a fun date night, or we're like out of town celebrating, doing something, I love bringing this palette because I just think it's so much fun. So next I'm going to touch on their more pastel themed palettes. So I have 6 palettes to talk about in this section. I have 4 that come in this packaging, so these 4 retail for $12. Let me start with those. So let's start with Lilac You a Lot. When this first came out, I didn't purchase it because I thought they were just re-releasing It's My Pleasure or re-promoting it. What's nice about this palette is that it is a little bit more of a pastel themed palette, but there are 2 deeper shades in this. Some of the other pastel palettes are kind of missing those deeper shades, and I do think they make a big difference. If you have a palette with 9 light shadows, it can be hard to create a lot of different looks, get, you know, a variety of looks, or even create something a little bit deeper. There's only so much you can do to build up a light pastel shadow, so those 2 deeper shades definitely make a big difference, because I have been able to create something a little bit more bright and intense on occasion. But overall, when I use this palette, I do get a little bit of a softer, toned down purple look, and I think that's kind of fun. Usually I do something pretty vibrant when it comes to purples, so I feel like this palette is nice because it just keeps things a little bit more simple, a little bit more soft overall. Next, let's talk about the Mint to Be palette. So this one is a pastel mint eyeshadow palette, and as far as the Colourpop monochromatic palettes go, I feel like I get the least amount of variety within this one. Typically when I use this palette, I just get like the same look over and over, even if I reach for different shadows. And I think it's because, I mean, how much variety can you really have with 9 different mint shadows? For me, the pastel palettes as a whole tend to look very similar on the eyes when I use the palette for multiple looks compared to like the brighter monochromatic palettes, but I definitely think it's the case with this one. The matte shadows look a little bit different. There is a good variety, but 3 of the metallic shadows look almost identical on the eyes, and they look a little bit different when you swatch them and a little bit different in the pan, but you really can't see a difference once you're actually wearing them. So I do like this palette for days where I want a mint eyeshadow look, but I do feel like there could have been maybe a little more variety. I almost feel like Just My Luck and Mint to Be could have been one palette if they just curated them a little bit better. I feel like Just My Luck is missing some lighter mint tones, and then Mint to Be is missing maybe like 1 or 2 deeper shades. And if I took all of the shadows out, I feel like I could probably create one palette that might work a little bit better and not have to have 2 separate palettes in my collection. The next one I want to talk about is the Baby Got Peach palette. I don't know if this one is technically considered a pastel palette. Whenever they kind of promote their pastel palettes, they usually include this one with the other 2, so that's why I included it here. But this is definitely one of my go-to palettes for the summertime. There are a lot of beautiful colors in here, and I think the shadows in here just work so well together. I definitely prefer this one to the orange palette because it's a little bit softer, a little bit more approachable, great for everyday wear. So if the orange palette is a little bit too intimidating for you, this might be a good alternative. This shadow does have 1 pressed glitter, but the rest of the shadows are mattes and metallics. The mattes blend out so easily. And again, this palette is on the lighter side, so I feel like I'm able to create more of an everyday look without going overboard. So I love reaching for this one. It's just a very simple, easy to work with palette, and it is one of my summertime staples. So Colourpop recently released the Miss Bliss palette along with 2 other pastel palettes. Each of them has like a mix of colors. So one has like greens and blues, one has blues and pinks, and then this one in particular has oranges and pinks. I don't think this palette is going to appeal to a lot of people. I do enjoy using this one because it does give you more of a light, soft pastel look. And what's nice about this is that there is a mix of pink and orange. So if the Baby Got Peach palette is a little bit too peach for you, this might be a good alternative because you do get some of those peachier tones, but you also get some pinks as well. The reason why I don't think this is going to work for everyone is because, first of all, there is 1 pressed glitter. Other than that, there are 4 matte shadows that actually have shimmer in them. So Colourpop has this formula where it's a matte base, but it's infused with shimmer. And I know not everybody likes that formula. I don't mind it because I'll typically just dip my brush in, tap off the excess. And what's nice about those shadows is that they do blend out very, very easily. There are 2 other matte shadows in here that don't have any shimmer, and then 2 kind of like satin shadows. The metallics in here are not super intense or vibrant. They're definitely on the softer side. I mean, this palette as a whole is on the softer side. So if you have a deeper skin tone, I would probably skip over this because you can't really build the shadows up to be too intense. And if you like more of a vibrant look overall, I would skip over this as well. I think this palette is going to be meant for a very specific crowd of people who like light pinks and light oranges, just something very, very soft. So the next palettes I wanted to focus on are these 3 palettes. These come in cardboard packaging. They retail for $14. So they are a little bit more expensive than the palettes that come in plastic packaging with a mirror. So let's start with the one that I'm wearing today. This one is the Colourpop Making Mauves palette. This is one of my all-time favorites, probably like top 5 for sure. As far as 9-pan palettes go, definitely top 3. This is something that I got back in the spring, and I love using it. There's so much going on within this 9-pan palette, and when you first look at it, I mean, it looks like a cooler toned neutral palette with a few mauves, but there are so many different looks you can create with this. Again, this is one of those 9-pan palettes that I feel like has so much versatility because all of the shadows work well together, but you can also do like a completely neutral look, something more pink toned or something more purple toned. The matte shadows blend so well. I think that there's something extra blendable about these shadows. They're very soft and easy to work with. There are 5 matte shadows and then 1 matte has shimmer in it. But the metallic shadows are insanely beautiful on the eyes. I'm wearing the shade Bi-Coastal all over my lid, and it just looks so sparkly and gorgeous, but it glides on perfectly with your finger. Some of the metallic shadows in here, I guess Bi-Coastal and the shade a la mode, are almost like gritty metallics, which doesn't sound really appealing at all, but they apply easily, and because they kind of have like that gritty texture, I feel like they look so sparkly and intense on the eyes. I don't know if I should describe them as gritty because I feel like that's not a good adjective to use when you're talking about an eyeshadow, but they just have like a pretty sparkle to them and a really intense metallic base. I love every single shadow in here. I don't have any issues with any of them, and I just feel like this palette makes pastel colors a little bit more approachable because when you're wearing pastel, it doesn't have to be like a super intense green or purple. It can be more of like a mauve tone. So if you like pinks and purples, but you don't want something as intense and vibrant as like Lilac You a Lot or It's My Pleasure, this one will be the perfect option. I get so much use out of it. Next, let's talk about the Blush Crush palette. So this one is a pink themed palette. It's a little bit more warm toned. You do get two kind of purpley shades in the bottom corners, which are nice for creating more of a dramatic or colorful look. In the pan, they look a little bit dull, but on the eyes, they do look really purple and pretty. So you are able to create a variety of looks. I don't think that this palette is as interesting as making mauves, at least for me. I think that this is more of like an everyday palette. If you love pink eyeshadow and you like to keep things a little bit softer, you might enjoy using this one. And again, it's a little bit more warm toned, but I think if you have, a medium, tan, or deep skin tone, you might want to skip over this because like 4 or 5 of the shadows are pretty light. Like 3 of them could probably be used as highlight shades on a deeper skin tone. And again, you do get those darker shades in the bottom corners to create more of a dark dramatic look, but overall when I use this, I get a very, very light pink look. So if that's something you go for on an everyday basis, you might enjoy using this one. I think it performs well, and as you can probably tell, I do use it quite a bit, but I don't feel like it's anything super unique. So if you're looking for an everyday palette, you might want to pick it up, but if you're looking for like a standout palette from their line, I would skip over this one. Let's finish up with the neutral palettes. So I have 4 palettes to talk about, including one more that retails for $14 that comes in the cardboard packaging. This one is the She's Got Solstice palette. I guess I don't know if I would consider this one a true neutral palette. I guess I would. It's more of like a neutral palette with a few pops of pink and also a green. I guess when I use this, I typically get more of like a warm toned, bright neutral look. So I guess you can kind of classify it however you want, but the shadows in here perform well. I actually like this a lot more than I thought I would. It's definitely a mid-toned palette, so I don't get a super light look or a super dramatic look. I mean, you can definitely create more of a true neutral look with a couple of these shadows, or you can intensify it with the pink tones. There's also like this really pretty deeper orangey red brown that I think looks great in the outer corner. There is one really unique formula in here. The shade Super Stardust is kind of like a pressed Super Shock shadow mixed with a metallic. I talked about it when I did my review of this palette, but I don't think it's going to appeal to everyone. It's a little bit difficult to work with. It's almost like this foiled shadow, or when you apply it to your eyes, it looks like you're putting gold foil on your eyes, but when you wear it, it looks amazing. It is seriously so stunning and gorgeous to work with, and it stays in place really well. Again, I wouldn't say that this is a standout palette from their line, but if you're not someone who wears colorful shades or cooler tone shades and you like medium warm tones, then I think you will be able to get a lot of use out of this. The palette performs well, and it doesn't have any pressed glitters, and it doesn't have any matte shadows with shimmer mixed in. It just has some of like Colourpop staple shadows. Finishing up with these 3 palettes, these all retail for $12 each as well. The Colourpop Going Coconuts palette is definitely one of my top 3 as well. This one just looks worn because I use it every single week. I'm honestly surprised that I haven't hit pan on like 2 of these shadows. I have to be getting close because I use them nonstop. This palette is my perfect everyday go-to palette. It's perfect because it's not overly warm toned or overly cool toned, and you get such a mix of beautiful shadows. The matte shadows blend out so easily. There is one matte shadow with glitter mixed in, but typically I'll use that in the crease. And then there are 3 metallic shadows that are really intense and shimmery all over the eyes. I do use those for sure, but I think for the most part, I just love the matte shadows in this palette. They have the perfect undertone. They look great if I want to pair them with really warm toned metallics all over the lid or more of a cooler toned look overall. And I just think that this palette is such a nice complementary palette to every other Colourpop 9-pan palette that I own. The last 2 palettes that I have with me are the Sol and Mar palettes. These were released a few years ago and they have updated the packaging since. So now they come in more colorful packaging, but I still have the older palettes. These are nice if you like mainly neutral shadows, but you want a pop of color. So maybe the Orangey Glad palette is too much orange for you. This might be a good alternative. So this palette comes with some neutral shadows, and then you do get a bright red, some bright oranges. So I think the orange palette and the red palette might be a little bit too much for some people. And if that's the case, and you feel like you don't need 9 orange shadows or 9 red shadows, this is going to be such a good alternative because it comes with complementary complementary neutral shadows. I've been talking so much in this video, so I'm starting to trip over my words, but the neutral tones in here are a little bit more bronzy and warm, so they complement the really bright tones in here very, very well too. So I love using this one during the summertime. I think that this is an underrated palette. I mean, I'm sure it still sells because they've had it on their website for a while, but it is a good option if you want a few pops of color. The Mar palette is really pretty too. I think I like this one a little bit better because the neutrals in here are slightly more toned down. They're definitely still like vibrant, warm toned neutrals, but they're not as orangey or red as the neutrals in the Soul palette. And then the colorful shadows in here are greens and blues. There are only 3 of them. So again, if like the Blue Moon palette is a little bit too much for you, this might be a good alternative because you get staple shadows you can wear all the time and then just a few pops of color to incorporate it whenever you're feeling it. But both of these are great options, so definitely don't skip over them if you are considering trying one of the Colourpop 9-pan palettes. I think that these would probably get used in your collection a little bit more if you're not as into colorful shadow, but you want to try it on occasion and you don't feel the need to have an entire palette full of colorful tones. Now, the other 2 palettes that I tried that I actually decluttered from my collection were the Anna and Elsa palettes. Those retail for $15, so they are more expensive than any of the other 9-pan palettes. They are still available on Colourpop's website, and I think they're cute. I definitely think the packaging was adorable. If you love Frozen or you have someone in your life who loves Anna or loves Elsa, I think they would make an amazing gift. As for the shadow quality, the Anna palette performed very, very well. I believe there was 1 pressed glitter in that palette, but the shadows were great. There were some purples, some neutrals, and I thought, again, it was just like a fun color story for a 9-pan palette. I didn't find myself reaching for it super often, so I actually just passed it along to someone else who could enjoy it more than I do, and I feel like, you know, if the colors appeal to you, the palette as a whole does perform very, very well. The Elsa palette was a little bit more difficult to work with. I thought the colors in the palette were so pretty, and again, they had such a good variety, so you could create a lot of different looks, but I did find that some of the shadows in that palette were a little bit patchy, and it wasn't just like 1 or 2, it was probably 3 or 4, so like half of the palette didn't perform extremely well, and for $15, I think I just expected a little bit more from it. I mean, I think a lot of people who are buying that palette are buying it based on the fact that it is an Elsa palette or a Disney collaboration, but if you're looking at it just based on the actual quality, I would probably skip over it. Okay, so those are all of the palettes I wanted to share with you guys. I'm sure this was a very long video. I talked so much, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on all of the 9-pan palettes now that I've had the chance to use them for a long time. So I hope this video was helpful. If you guys have any questions about certain palettes or comparisons, let me know. I'll try to get back to you guys as soon as possible. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you very soon with a new video. Bye.